In 1940s Europe, this was not madness, it was survival. As the German blitzkrieg tore through Poland, France, and much of Europe, military strategists around the world were forced to rethink everything they knew about warfare. The Nazis' combination of fast tanks and aircraft, their dreaded lightning war, had crushed nations that were still fighting with World War I tactics. To win, the Allies needed innovation, and fast. In Britain, deep within secret hangars and laboratories, engineers began sketching something extraordinary, a tank that could glide through the air. Among them was a visionary named L.E. Baines, a British designer, who believed that if a tank could be fitted with detachable wings, it could be towed into the air by a powerful aircraft and released over enemy territory. His concept was bold, bordering on insanity. He called it the Baines Bat. The Baines Bat wasn't meant to be an actual flying tank, but a proof of concept, a glider that could carry the weight and balance of a tank. In 1943, Baines and his small team built a 1/3 scale prototype. They tested it at Sherburn and Elmet Airfield in Yorkshire. The model was light but strong, its wings wide like those of a bat, hence the name. The tests were promising. The bat glided smoothly and landed perfectly. In theory, Baines proved that a winged tank could indeed fly, if only someone could solve the problem of how to tow it and how to land it safely in combat. But Britain was already stretched thin, and as the war turned toward Europe's liberation, there was little money or time left for fantasy projects. The Baines Bat was quietly shelved, a forgotten dream of iron and wings. But on the other side of Europe, in the Soviet Union, the dream was far from dead. Amid the brutal Eastern Front, where battles like Stalingrad and Kursk turned fields into burning steel graveyards, a Soviet engineer named Oleg Antonov refused to give up on the idea of a flying tank. He believed that if a tank could be made to glide, it could reach front lines inaccessible by road or rail, mountainous regions, marshes, and enemy rear positions. Antonov's solution was astonishingly straightforward. Take a light tank, attach massive wooden biplane wings and a tail, and turn it into a glider. The result was one of the strangest vehicles ever conceived, the Antonov A-40 Krylya Tanka, or tank with wings. In 1942, Antonov and his engineers selected a T-60 light tank, stripped it down to reduce weight, removed its ammunition, lights, and even most of the fuel. They then bolted on enormous 18-meter biplane wings made of wood and canvas, along with a tail unit that gave it stability in the air. The wings were detachable, designed to be jettisoned after landing. The plan was simple. A powerful bomber, such as the Tupolev TB-3, would tow the flying tank into the air, release it near the battlefield, and the tank would glide down, detach its wings, and roll straight into combat. The idea was both brilliant and insane. But this was the Soviet Union during war. Impossible was never a good enough excuse. On a cold September morning in 1942, at a remote airfield near Moscow, the A-40 was prepared for its first and only flight. Test pilot and tank driver Sergei Anokhin, a daring airman with nerves of steel, volunteered to take on the bizarre mission. The TB-3 bomber roared to life, its engines straining as it began towing the winged tank across the runway. The A-40 wobbled, its enormous wings cutting through the wind like a giant bird made of steel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, impossibly, it lifted. The world's first flying tank was in the air. Witnesses later described the scene as both majestic and terrifying. The massive contraption soared behind the bomber like some monstrous hybrid of airplane and tank. The tow cable strained under the weight. The bomber's engine screamed in agony. It was clear that the TB-3 was too weak to carry such a heavy load for long. The pilot, fearing the engines would stall, was forced to release the tank early. The A-40 glided briefly, steady and graceful, and then descended. Antonov guided it as best he could, landing the tank safely in a nearby field. The wings detached as planned. The T-60's engine roared back to life, and the world witnessed something it had never seen before: a tank landing like a plane, then driving away on its tracks. The experiment had worked, at least in principle. But the dream was short-lived. The Soviet Air Force had no plane powerful enough to tow a flying tank into real battle. The TB-3 was outdated and underpowered, and newer bombers were needed for combat, not towing strange experiments. Antonov's project was quietly canceled. The A-40 prototype was disassembled, and its parts were lost to time. Yet the legacy of the flying tank did not vanish. The concept inspired decades of future thinking, from airborne armor deployment to modern-day air-dropped vehicles. In many ways, Antonov's mad invention foreshadowed the age of rapid mobility and airlifted armor that would define modern warfare. Even in the West, similar ideas persisted. The U.S. experimented with glider tanks and lightweight air-droppable vehicles. Britain worked on compact armored carriers that could be disassembled and transported by plane. Every army dreamed of a weapon that could arrive anywhere, anytime, armored, armed, and ready to fight. But none ever dared to attach full wings to a tank. Still, there was something profoundly symbolic about those strange, doomed experiments. They represented the spirit of wartime ingenuity, the refusal to accept limits even when reality said no. The engineers who designed these machines weren't madmen. They were visionaries trapped in desperate times, trying to win a war with courage and imagination instead of numbers and brute force. If you think about it, the story of the flying tank is really not about engineering failure. It's about human ambition. It's about the way war accelerates invention, pushing the boundaries of what's possible and what's sane. In the archives of forgotten war machines, the flying tank sits proudly alongside other miracles of desperation: rocket-propelled planes, magnetic mines, remote-controlled bombs, and ice aircraft carriers. Each one tells the same story, of men who refused to stop dreaming, even when surrounded by death and chaos. And in the end, though the flying tank never saw combat, its spirit lived on. When the war ended and peace returned, Oleg Antonov went on to design some of the world's largest aircraft, including the Antonov AN-225 Mriya, a true giant of the skies.